In the Western world, pirates have always loomed large in the collective imagination, with the likes of Henry Morgan, Jack Rackham, and Edward Teach achieving larger-than-life status. Despite this, the impact of European piracy in its most famous Caribbean theatre pales in comparison to its Asian counterpart. Throughout the medieval and early modern eras, from the shores of Honshu to Malacca, great pirate bands dominated the oceans, where they mastered both commerce and carnage, brought ancient empires to their knees, and connected countless cultures from China to Portugal through barter and blood. Welcome to our video on the Wakō, the seminal pirate lords of the East. The end of the tale is ultimately that they aren't there anymore, so you can buy goods from Asia pretty easily, and we've got a recommendation to take advantage of this from our sponsor Tokyo Treat and Sakura Co. It's a monthly snack box subscription service that provides a curated selection of snacks that are only available in Japan, such as Sakura Pepsi or Sake Kit Kats, sending them right to your door. It comes in two varieties. First is Tokyo Treat, a box that brings the latest products in the current season, including items only available for limited times in Japan, and in the biggest quantities. This month's theme is Sugoi Summer, featuring Japanese summer holiday classics like Chupa Chups Strawberry Cream Soda and Watermelon Seed Ramenade Candy. Second is Sakura Co., which focuses on traditional Japanese snacks made in partnership with long-running snack makers, preserving these cultural traditions. This month's theme is Okinawa Retreat, bringing you snacks from the place with the highest life expectancy in the world, so maybe they're good for you. Try their Shikuesa Manju, Okinawa cinnamon cookies, and more to find out, and pair them with teas to get the real experience. You even get a piece of Japanese tableware to boost the authenticity further. Everything in both boxes was delicious and came with booklets detailing all the items inside and explaining the Japanese culture around them. Check out either box via our links in the description and use our code KINGS to get $5 off your first order. The name Wakō translates roughly to Japanese pirate, with wo meaning dwarf, being a long-standing derogatory term by which the Chinese referred to the Japanese. However, as we'll see later in this video, the Wakō were neither entirely Japanese nor even entirely pirates. But before we get into that, let us discuss the earliest origins of our eponymous sea lords. Although the first use of the term Wakō dates back as early as the 4th century, our story begins in the 13th century. Like most stories set during this particular century, this one begins with the Mongols. As Genghis Khan and his successors put increasing pressure upon Korea from 1218, the ailing kingdom of Goryeo found its military manpower stretched thin, leaving its southern coasts largely undefended. This coincided with a wave of drought and starvation in Japan's Kyushu, Iki, and Tsushima Isles, which compelled its denizens to abandon their farms and estates and plunder foreign shores to survive. From 1223 onwards, Japanese pirate vessels from these islands, manned by rogue peasants and masterless samurai alike, raided the southern coast of Korea with consistent regularity. By 1259, the Chinggisids had achieved the submission of the Goryeo dynasty, and in the following decades would assume control of the whole peninsula. Afterwards, it was very likely that Korean testimonies of sea raiders from the land of Wa were what put Japan as a whole on the Mongol Empire's radar, which eventually led to the two failed Mongol invasion attempts of the land in 1274 and 1281. In the immediate decades after the Divine Winds shredded Kublai Khan's invasion fleet, Wakō raids declined. The reasons for this were manifold. Korea was now under the suzerainty of the world's biggest empire, while Tsushima and Iki had suffered widespread destruction during the Mongol invasions. Moreover, the Bakufu of the Kamakura shogunate had undergone great centralization reforms across Japan, which included clamping down on extrajudicial pirate gangs operating off their shores. However, by the mid-14th century, the authority of the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty was crumbling. Meanwhile, Japan's central authority was facing challenges of its own, with the new Ashikaga shogunate being embroiled in the rivalry between two schismatic imperial courts competing for each other's throne. This, compounded with a series of natural disasters that rocked Japan between 1346 and 1349, created another perfect storm upon which Wakō activity would flare up once more. From 1350 onwards, Wakō bands of as many as 3,000 men, operating mainly out of Tsushima and Iki, began plundering the coastline of Korea. Meanwhile, the Seoul samurai clan, vassals to the Ashikaga shogun and legitimate authority on Tsushima, seemed content to turn a blind eye to the pirate activity in their domain. The Wokou principally targeted Korean vessels carrying rice, the main form of currency of the age. When the Korean authorities began moving their tax rice over land, the Wokou responded by penetrating inland, raiding grain storehouses as far away from the coast as the environs of Pyongyang, taking many slaves in the process. It was very unfortunate timing for the Goryeo dynasty, whose beleaguered king Gongmin had just thrown off the Mongol yoke, only now to be dealing with a massive surge of well-organized marauders from the sea. Indeed, the deeply traumatic impact the Wokou had on the social and economic landscape of Korea contributed heavily to the eventual collapse of the nearly 500-year-old Goryeo dynasty in 1392. Northern China also suffered endemic Wokou attacks. From 1358 onwards, coastal areas like the Shandong Peninsula and Jiangsu province were the victim of large, well-organized raids, with the once mighty yet now enfeebled Mongolian emperors of the Yuan dynasty able to do little about it. The Koreans, however, did not sit idly by in the face of pirate violence. Under generals like Choi Yong and Yi Seong-gi, they lashed back against the Wokou, destroying over 300 ships in a raid on Tsushima in 1389. Yi Seong-gi, incidentally, would later usurp the declining Goryeo, becoming Taizong, the first king of Joseon. His descendant, King Sejong the Great of Joseon, would oversee the fatal death blow which would end this most recent phase of Wokou activity. In the summer of 1419, a large fleet of Joseon ships, carrying 17,000 men, sailed for Tsushima, launching raids across the entire isles. This attack was known as the Oi invasion, and finally prompted the So clan of Tsushima to actually do something about the pirates in their backyard. Moreover, the Ashikaga shogunate had resolved the rift in the imperial court back in 1392, and was able to restore order across the land once more. Meanwhile in China, a new dynasty, the Ming, had since overthrown the Mongol yoke, and the Ashikaga shogun had entered into tributary supplication with the Ming emperor in order to secure a legal trading relationship with the richest country in the world. This meant the shogunate had a vested interest in clamping down on pirates who might jeopardize that relationship. All of this brought an end to this second major wave of Wokou activity. However, the ocean is ever a lawless place, where desperate and ambitious people can go to seek their fortunes beyond the reach of feudal laws. In the 16th century, the geopolitical situation had shifted to favor paralegal maritime entrepreneurialism once more. After the Onin War of 1467, the authority of the Ashikaga shogunate had collapsed, causing social order in Japan to fail as the islands were torn up into dozens of independent warring fiefdoms, most of which were unable to contain Wokou activity. Moreover, by the 16th century, Ming China had begun imposing extremely strict regulations on foreign maritime trade. Ningbo was the only port city where the Japanese were permitted entry to participate in the highly ritualized tributary gift exchange prescribed by Chinese court protocol. However, after a brawl between two rival samurai clans, the Hosokawa and the Oichi, caused widespread chaos in Ningbo and its environs in 1523, China seriously curtailed commercial relations with Japan. Following this, black market smugglers and pirates surged into a niche once occupied by legitimate authorities. The Wokou of the 16th century would prove to be much different than their previous iterations. While the early Wokou were most likely of predominantly Japanese stock, the Wokou of the early modern era were a far more international affair, with tens of thousands of southern Chinese joining up, their ocean-going livelihoods having been dispossessed by the draconian Ming Dynasty trade bans. According to Ming Dynasty records, by the mid-16th century, as many as 70% of the Wokou were Chinese, mainly from the southern province of Fujian. Malays, Filipinos, and even a smattering of Portuguese Catholics would also colour Wokou ranks. While previous iterations of the Wakō localized their raids to Korea and northern China, the 16th century Wakō had a far wider reach, maintaining a dominating presence from Hirado to the Philippines. Although an undoubtedly cruel and brutal bunch, the Wakō were never one to seize through violence what they could obtain through business. Nowhere was this more evident than at Shuangyu, China's seedy black market entrepot. This hub of illegal trade was founded as a result of the entry of the Portuguese into the South China Sea in 1511. Having established colonial ports dotting Africa and the Indian Ocean, and conquered the Sultanate of Malacca, the Catholics were now seeking to breach the closed markets of China. Having failed to do so by force, they instead collaborated with Japanese sailors and Chinese smugglers from Fujian to create an illegal offshore emporium on the tiny island of Liuheng, where clandestine trade could be conducted in defiance of Ming maritime prohibitions. By the early 1540s, Shuangyu, known as Liampo by the Portuguese, had come under the rulership of a Wokou syndicate, the Shu, whose vast maritime commercial networks spread from Malacca to Kagoshima Prefecture. The Shu's chief lieutenant, the Wokou lord Wang Ji, is credited for helping lead the Portuguese to Japan in 1543, thereby facilitating the first steps any Europeans had taken on the land of the rising sun, while also popularizing the use of European-style firearms in not just Japan, but China as well. Ultimately, the story of Shuangyu is indicative of the fact that the Wakō were not just disruptive agents of chaos, but more often than not were crucial economic actors who greased the cogs of a massive pan-East Asian economy. Of course, setting up an unsanctioned port city inhabited by illegal smugglers on Chinese soil was not going to sit well with the Ming dynasty authorities. In 1547, the imperial court bestowed one Zhu Wan with the crisp title of Grand Coordinator of Jiajing and Concurrent Superintendent of Military Affairs for Jiajing and Fujian Coastal Defense, a role specifically created to combat Wakō piracy. Zhu Wan embraced his new purpose with relish, and in 1548 assembled a massive imperial fleet and stormed Shuangyu, burning it to the ground and forcing its smugglers to disperse among the southern Chinese coastline. Unfortunately for Zhu Wan, the Wakō had deep connections with some of the most powerful families in Fujian, who utilized his unlawful execution of prisoners to have him politically disgraced by the emperor, forcing him to commit suicide in 1550. For the pirates, an eloquent pen was often as effective a weapon to brandish against their enemies as a well-tempered sword. That is not to say that swords would not have their day, for the burning of Shuangyu would ultimately kickstart the single most violent decade in Wakō history. With Shuangyu incinerated, the Wakō had lost their means to smuggle goods in and out of China in an orderly, if still illegal way. Concurrently, with Zhu Wan dead and his fleet dispersed, a massive power vacuum had opened up in the southern Chinese coastline, allowing the pirates to recuperate their losses in the old-fashioned way. Thus began the Jiajing raids, thusly named for the Jiajing emperor, during whose reign they occurred. Between 1551 and 1560, Chinese archives report no less than 467 separate Wakō raids, an average of over 50 per year. Most of these were spearheaded by the aforementioned Wang Ji, who had become the most powerful voice among the Wakō clans, and was now operating off the Goto Islands, where he had established solid relations with the local Kyushu daimyos, and had begun styling himself as the King of Hui. Other notable pirate lords in this period included Shu Hai of the aforementioned Shu Syndicate, and admirals like Chen Dong and Ye Ma. During these excursions, Wakō ranks were often swelled by the very people they raided, as peasants on the Chinese coast decided they would rather throw their lot in with the pirates rather than deal with poverty, taxation, and the abusive presence of the imperial troops stationed quartered in their villages, who were often just as exploitative as the pirates they were supposed to be protecting the peasants from. Despite the fact that most of the chaos rendered upon Chinese shores was caused by the Chinese themselves, Ming officials tended to emphasize the Japaneseness of the raiders. That way, they could blame the destruction on the trespasses of barbaric foreigners, rather than as their failure to control their own subjects. That is not to say that there were still not ethnic Japanese who played a major role in the Jiajing raids. as according to the sources of the time, plenty of poor Japanese, particularly from Satsuma, Higo and Nagato, saw the potential to obtain Chinese plunder a very attractive opportunity indeed. Eventually, over the course of several years, Ming authorities were able to contain the Wakō tide through a policy of divide and conquer. By 1556, a new Grand Coordinator of anti-piracy activity, Hu Zongxian, had been appointed by the Ming government. Rather than trying to brute force the issue as Ju Wan had, Zongxian cleverly exploited the rivalries between the most powerful of Wakō lords. He appeased the pirate lord Shu Hai with promises of lavish gifts and an official pardon in return for his help in betraying Chen Dong and Ye Ma, who Shu Hai was on bad terms with after a feud over the rights to a captured slave girl. Chen Dong and Ye Ma were subsequently betrayed and captured by the Ming authorities, and with Shu Hai now subsequently isolated, Hu Zongxian went back on his promise and had him destroyed as well. In 1557, Zongxian turned his attention onto Wang Ji, who he lured out of his Japanese island stronghold and back to China by promising him a full pardon and offering to negotiate a relaxation of maritime prohibitions so Wang could trade legitimately with the Ming state. This, of course, was a trap, and Wang Ji was subsequently captured, imprisoned, and beheaded 2 years later. After the elimination of all of their most prominent captains, Wakō raids on Chinese shores were seriously curtailed and had more or less fully stopped by 1567, when the Ming government finally lifted their prohibitions on international trade, eliminating the need for smugglers and pirates to fill that niche. It should be noted that the Portuguese came off especially well in the aftermath of the Jiajing raids. Despite having once worked alongside the Wakō, they had since entered into an agreement with the Ming Emperor, whereby in return for eliminating the pirate fleets of Guangzhou, they were allowed to lease out a port, Macau, which became a foothold into the markets of China which the Portuguese would hold for the next 400 years. Moreover, the Ming government still blamed the Japanese for the Wakō raids, and thus prohibited Japanese from setting foot on their shores. This allowed the Portuguese to establish a firm foothold in Japan as the primary supplier of Chinese silk in the nation, the social and religious consequences of which we have covered in our previous videos on the Shimabara Rebellion and William Adams, the English pilot-turned-samurai. Despite being largely repulsed from Chinese shores, Wakō activity continued for a time, now shifting southwards to the Philippines, where the local gold, ginger, sandalwood and spices offered plenty of opportunity for enrichment. Initially, Wakō bands found great success in these tropical isles, even establishing an independent pirate city-state, Apari, in northern Luzon. However, before long, the Wakō found themselves in conflict with another Iberian power, the Spanish, who were currently in the process of colonizing the Philippines for themselves. In 1574, the Chinese Wakō lord, Lima Hong, tried to invade the Spanish city of Manila but was repelled. Then in 1582, the Spaniards defeated the Wakō in the Cagayan battles, where Spanish conquistadors and rogue Japanese samurai came to blows in one of the strangest military clashes in early modern history. We recommend you check out our dedicated video on this event. Eventually, the Spanish seized Apari, and the activity of the Japanese and Chinese piratical activity in the Philippines was greatly diminished. Indeed, at the turn of the 17th century, the Wakō had entered into their final twilight years. Back in Japan, where it had all started, a series of invincible warlords had begun uniting the once shattered land, which by 1602 had culminated in the emergent Tokugawa shogunate. In the ensuing decades, the Tokugawa shoguns would enact policies that nearly completely isolated Japan from the outside world. Almost all outsiders were forbidden entry, and more importantly, no Japanese was permitted to leave on pain of death. Thus, all pirates operating on Japanese shores were either snuffed out by the newly re-established central authority or incorporated into the state as naval bands, which served the national hegemony. It is here that our history of the Wakō pirates will end. It is admittedly an arbitrary ending, for piracy and smuggling in the South China Sea would continue going strong for centuries, with massively powerful sea lords, like the pirate queen Qing Shi, coming to mind. However, these were figures who largely had no ties to Japan, from where the Wakō, despite spending their heyday as a highly international band of sailors, had originated. In that sense, it can be said that while the Wakō themselves were eventually snuffed out, the legacy they left on the seas they once ruled endured for far longer. More videos on the history of Japan and criminal enterprises are on the way, so make sure you have subscribed and press the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.